And welcome back everyone to another special video of the 5000 sub week. And for today we have another video about openings and another game of mine which I played in 2022 and one opening idea which I managed to have in that game, and I think it was quite a nice novelty in the Najdorf in the English attack. So I wanted to show you guys that idea in this video. So it was from the year 2022. I played in the European Individual Chess Championship against German player Nikolas Wachinger. I think he's around my age. Back then he had a rating of 2380. I think now he's a pretty strong international master. So it was e4, c5. As I said before, it was the Najdorf, and after a6, I went for f3, which, in case you've seen my recap from the German Bundesliga, which just finished now, a couple of days ago, I've also played that line. That was actually for the second time in my life. This game, which we see right here, it was the first time I played the English attack. And actually before this tournament, I prepared quite a lot in this line, but for some reason I did not really play it that often afterwards anymore, even though the game went really well. So my opponent went for e5, and actually what I need to say is that my preparation for that game was also quite nice, I think, because I saw from his repertoire he exclusively played the Najdorf, and he mostly went for lines which Anish Giri recommended in his chessable course. And in exactly that line which Anish recommended, I found a pretty nice idea, which we're going to see later. So in case you're familiar with some courses, it's always nice to sort of see if your opponent maybe follows some of the lines, and then you can try to look for ideas or sort of weak spots in the recommended repertoires. So he went for e5. Of course, e6 is also one option, but this line is sort of out of fashion nowadays because white has this quite simple plan to play with queen d2, g4, and g5, and I still think it's playable for black. Like, I don't think this line is bad itself for black, but e5 seems to be giving more options for black, and this line is even more concrete than e5, I would say. I think this main line goes something like, isn't it g4, b4, and then usually black plays in the center with some d5. I think usually they go h6 first. I think this is one of the big lines, if I'm not mistaken here, and it leads to very, very crazy positions overall. Also, there is one idea here, by the way, this move h5, which I also played myself with black. I think this is also quite a nice, interesting idea. The point is just that white wants to stop g4, and actually in my game my opponent also went for h5, so the ideas are sort of similar. So my opponent went e5, knight b3, bishop e7, bishop e3, and bishop e6, sort of following the main line. Black also, there's all sorts of ideas. He can start with bishop e6, which has sort of the idea that he can, in some cases, develop his bishop to g7 later on as well. So, for example, after queen d2, h5 now, if white goes for knight d5, this is one of the lines. Black has this option to fianchetto the bishop to the king side with g6 and bishop g7. So there are many different setups. But he went for bishop e7, bishop e3, and now bishop e6. I went for queen d2, and here he went for this move h5, which, also Anish Giri recommends in his chessable course, which is already by now like 5 years old, but it's still a fantastic work overall. And many people have started playing this setup with h5. The idea, as I mentioned earlier, is just to completely avoid g4. But of course, the downside is that also black has sort of weakened his king side with this move h5, and also the square on g5 is a little bit weakened. So there are, of course, up and downsides. In my game on the weekend, my opponent went for this line with short castle, long castle, and knight d7, which is also, of course, completely playable. That was how my game went, and here my opponent sort of surprised me with the move queen c7, which I wasn't that familiar with. I only prepared rook c8 for that game. So yeah, that line is also quite huge. You need to see some stuff there. Of course, b4 is another move here when white has a couple of options, like I think knight a4, knight e2 are possible, but g takes f6 was always like the sort of the main move. And after bc3, queen c3, knight f6, knight a5, this is quite a theoretical line as well, but yeah, many different options. I think that knight e2 is probably by number of games the main move, if I'm not wrong here. So yeah, h5 was the game, knight d5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, and bishop f5, and this is the sort of position you can get with this move h5. I mean, white also has a couple of other options. He could also go for long castle here, but then often it becomes quite difficult to generate play on the king side because g4 is not there anymore. And otherwise, black has quite an easy plan to play some b5, rook c8, then maybe b4, or also the knight could come to c4 like that. So I went for the move knight d5. Also bishop e2 is quite interesting. White can also go for a short castle then, sort of arguing that h5 is not that good here. But even there, black is holding his own ground. So I went for knight d5. Now he went for knight takes d5. Bishop d5 is also an option, but generally white is quite happy, I would say, to get the bishop pair here. And especially now that the bishop is on e7, it would much rather be on this g7 square. So he went bishop f5, bishop e2, and now he went for the move which Anish also recommends in his chessable course, which is a5. The idea is that he wants to provoke a4, and now a sort of long castle is out of the question because white has weakened his queen side like this. So that's the whole idea of throwing in a5 earlier. Nowadays, people are trying this move bishop h4 check, which I think is actually also quite interesting. It looks sort of ridiculous because black is just losing a full tempo. But the point is that now this h3 square is quite weakened, and short castle is not a dangerous plan anymore now, because after short castle, something like f4 can now always be answered with bishop h3. This is like the whole idea. But of course, now white has the option to castle long, and this is sort of quite a theoretical line nowadays. Now black has options like a5 or also knight d7, and it's quite complicated overall. But my opponent went for a5. a4 is sort of obligated, short castle, and now I also have to go for short castle. If long castle, I guess bishop d7 could be a bit uncomfortable because it's not so easy to defend this pawn, and bishop b5 is also not something I would really like, since a4 and a3 could come in the near future. Also, the knight has to go to a1. That doesn't look very promising for white. So short castle, knight d7, and now the only way for white to play for an edge is probably the move f4, which I played in the game. And now, of course, we can see that this pawn on h5 is not necessarily great because it is just often hanging here, and the king side is a little bit weakened. He has to take, more or less. I think there was also this move bishop e4, which I think, according to my notes, there was f5 the best move when this bishop on e4 is a little bit out of play. But e takes f4 is sort of the established main move. Now bishop takes f4, and he went for rook c8. I have to say that this is not all forced. Like I checked that there are even alternatives, like bishop f6, I think right away was one option, even though now I'm just wondering what happens after bishop d6. There's queen b6, which just picks up the piece. So that's quite an easy way to blunder right here. But rook c8 is still Anish's recommendation, c3, and now knight f6. So the pawn on d5 can be attacked sometimes, and also the knight can jump into e4 in some cases. And here I played the, back then, very rare move knight d4, which was not a novelty just yet. I think there were 1 or 2 correspondence games, but it was already quite a rare move. But still, it was given by Anish, and the line which Anish gave, my opponent actually remembered, so I think he was quite familiar with the course, which is bishop e4. Bishop g6, by the way, is also playable. This was what was played in the correspondence games. Here, bishop f3, knight e4. This is how the correspondence games went. But in general, this seemed at least practically quite dangerous for black. White has this option to take here and go knight f5. And after queen d7, knight g7. This, we're still following this correspondence game. And here, black sort of had to find this move queen g4. And in the end, it sort of fizzles out to a draw. Many pieces will exchange, and it's going to lead to a peaceful result quite soon. But he went for bishop e4, c4, and now bishop g6 back. So this was sort of the idea to provoke c4 to get queen b6 in with some play along this diagonal. But my preparation has only started here. I went bishop d3. Queen b6 is again sort of forced. Otherwise, if black is not careful and goes for something like this, white is positionally in a very good situation. The knight can go to this nice b5 square, or also to f5, and the pawn on d6 is weak, and as well the bishop on e7 is not doing much as well. So he has to play for activity, queen b6, bishop g6, f takes g6, and I think my opponent was even still blitzing until here. And I think after b3, knight g4, this is sort of where Anish's course stopped, which is totally understandable, because it seems like black has good counterplay with g5 and bishop f6 to come. but my opponent was sort of unlucky that I went quite deep in this variation. So my game continued h3, also my preparation continued with h3. Now g5 is forced, and here rook a e1. So this is all sort of forced. Otherwise, if I give up this bishop, then it could be a bit problematic because bishop f6 is coming and his bishop now will become quite strong. So rook a1 is forced, and now already black has a couple of options. So this was already not easy. He did find the correct move for now, though. He went bishop f6. Other moves would be to take on f4, but now he will have sort of a strategic disaster. After rook e4, the pawn on f4 is hanging, and the queen is also not actually doing so much on b6, and it's going to be quite hard to defend this pawn on f4. If rook f8, queen f2 was quite unpleasant for black. G takes f4 was another option, but sort of the same here. After rook f2, this pawn on f4 is also quite weak, and on top of that, knight e6 could come in the near future as well. So he went for bishop f6, which is good, and now after hg4, black has to make a very important decision. So if you're trying to improve your calculation, please stop the video and try to figure out what you would do here. Gonna give you some time now to stop the video. There are a couple of options for black. The small hint I'm going to give you at the start is that taking on d4 is the correct decision, but the question is how you should take on d4. You could take with the bishop or with the queen. In the game, my opponent took with the wrong piece. But before we go into that, I also want to mention the move g takes f4, which I think was also possible. But here, I believe after rook takes f4, my line continued rook e8, takes on e8, rook e8, and rook takes f6. G takes f6, and now something like, I think you had to move the king somewhere, or maybe queen d3, I think was the move to get queen g6, yeah. And black was holding here objectively, but at least practically it seemed very unpleasant because the king is very weak and the queen is still not really helping in the defense. I think queen d3 was the good move here. So that would be an option, but it would still be better to take on d4 because it also looks nicer just to take with check. But you need to figure out how to take correctly. And in the game, my opponent took with the bishop, which is actually the wrong decision. But to understand that, it takes a lot of understanding and calculation, and it's super hard. I was lucky to have prepared all of this until the end game, basically, which we're going to see quite soon. But to point out why bishop d4 is wrong, we should have a look at this actually first. Yeah. So what happened in the game? Now bishop e3, rook takes f1, king takes f1, rook f8 check, king g1. Before that, I don't really see any big alternatives. He could take on e3, but I guess it would lead to something similar like in the game. Probably might even transpose. So take takes, rook f8, king g1, take, and queen takes e3, and rook takes e3. And here, white, of course, has the much better pawn structure, and already white has ideas like rook e6 or rook e7, and it's here already looking a bit unpleasant for black. Like if it takes on g4, then I would be guessing that rook e6 or rook e7, or even rook e4 could be unpleasant. Rook e4, maybe there's rook f4, but this looks quite good. And again, these pawn endgames, black has to be quite careful if they're not lost, which we're going to see in the game as well. So my opponent went for h4, which is sensible. Just fixing the pawn on g4 is a weakness as well. And here I went for rook e7. And the question is now, how is the pawn endgame after rook f7? Remember that the king is on g1. So how would you evaluate the pawn endgame? Another question for you. I'm going to tell you right now, it is in fact lost right here. Because if white takes with the king on g1, the line continues like this. The king's run. The king runs, wants to run to the queen side. So for example, like this. And if the king goes to e5, then after king d3, white will play for this breakthrough with b4. So if b6, king e3 is important. And right now, b4 is breaking through ab4 and now a5. By the way, c5 was not winning here. I checked this, which was quite a funny line. And in the end, even though white is a queen up and the pawn is still 2 squares from promoting, there's actually no way to win this position. So this would just be a draw. But a4 is breaking through and now c5 is winning. But you could also ask, how does white actually break through if black just runs over with the king like this? And here the whole point was that after king d4, now the threat is c5, so black has to go b6. And now after king c3, king c7, b4 wins, because after taking, the king is not in time to reach this a6 square. That was the whole point. And now a brief spoiler already, that after queen takes d4, he will get the same just with one tempo up, and therefore there the pawn endgame is a draw. So if we go through this line after queen d4, here he's winning some time, because the king is actually on h2. And here after rook f4, white is sort of forced to activate his rook, like rook e7. And now black could take on g4, which is probably also enough for a draw, but it doesn't look fully convincing. But what is in fact a draw is now rook f7, because now we have the same position just with the king on h2. And here, if we go to the same line, black can just reach the square on b7, and after b4 he can take and go king a6. And therefore it's a draw here. So that's quite a sick reason. I mean, that variation goes almost like 15 moves, maybe even longer. So to see all of that and understand it, I think it's very hard in a game, maybe even impossible. So therefore queen d4 would have been the right way to continue, but he went for bishop d4, bishop e3, and this was how the game went. He went h4, rook e7, and after rook f7, actually here I played rook e8 check first, because I thought he has to go rook f8, but this was actually a big blunder. So I almost played a perfect game, but here I gave him a chance to actually play king h7. In the game, I thought that rook d8 just would win the game, but after rook f4, it actually turns out that black has enough counterplay here with g4, which I overlooked during the game, and here black actually is in time to save a draw, since the king is quite weak and he can play g3 potentially with some mating ideas. So I should have taken right away, and what I missed here was this exact line which I saw earlier, that I can just go king d3, and if king f4, well, I have c5. But I think what I missed here is that I have this breakthrough with b4 and takes an a5. That was sort of my issue. And I thought if I start with this, and I just was calculating rook f8, then I'm not even allowing this to him. So that was the whole idea. The game continued like this. I did not even let the king in once again. King c3, king f6, and now I have b4 even with a better version. Takes on b4, king e5, a5, and my opponent resigned, because again I have the much better pawn structure, and he's just not in time to get any counterplay here. c5 is just breaking through, and if king d4, just king b5 followed by king c6, and king takes d6, and white is winning. So that was one of my deepest opening preparation, I think, ever, and perhaps also the deepest opening preparation I'll ever have. So I invested a lot of time in the English attack back then, before this tournament, and it really paid off in this game specifically. And it's also a very nice calculation exercise. So if you have some students and you want to torture them, then I would really recommend you to give this position for the black pieces and let them try to figure out how they would take on d4. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Remember that tomorrow is going to be a stream at 7 p.m. Central European time. If you like the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. You can also visit my website, felixbroberger.com, for more information. And I'm gonna see you guys soon. So take care.